the golfer in a physical assessment, we want to kind of look at the full body to make sure that all of the muscles and joints are working as they're supposed to, and that we don't have any imbalances or any sort of compensations. So if we look at just kind of the body as a whole, the body is made up of alternating segments of mobility and stability. And so what I mean by that is if we start kind of towards the ground, we'll start with the ankle. If we look at the ankle joint moves in lots of planes of motion. It has dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, it goes inversion, eversion, it's got rotation, so it has lots of degrees of motion. So we're going to call that a pretty mobile joint because it has lots of degrees of mobility. We move up the chain and we move to the knee. The knee primarily does flexion and extension. It has a little rotation, has a little side bend, but primarily the major arc of motion is in flexion and extension. So it would be considered more of a stable joint because it doesn't have as much movement in all three planes. We come up to the hip. The hip is considered more of a mobile joint. We've got flexion, extension, we've got abduction, adduction, we've got rotation. We can move in lots of different planes there. Again, moving up to the lumbar spine. The lumbar spine is meant to be more stable, and we talk about, that core stability a lot, but the lumbar spine is primarily meant to flex and extend. Yes, it has a little bit of side bend, it has a little bit of rotation, but not a lot. We only have about 10 degrees total for the whole lumbar spine, as opposed to we have lots of degrees of flexion and extension. So it's going to be more of a stable joint. Moving up to the thoracic spine or that upper back, that thoracic spine has a lot of range of motion. We need to have a lot of rotation, a lot of side bend, a lot of flexion and extension. So it's going to be considered a more mobile joint. And in terms of golf, and so on and so forth, kind of throughout the body, and we can look at each joint as a mobile or stable joint, kind of to put it into one of two buckets there. In terms of golf, we really need to have good mobility, particularly at the hips and at the thoracic spine. That's going to be our two main points of rotation, or at the hips and at the thoracic spine. And so normally what should happen is we've got good mobility thoracic spine, good mobility at the hips, and that lumbar spine, the lower back, is nice and stable. The problem is when that pattern is broken or it becomes dysfunctional. So a lot of times what we see when we evaluate people is that the hips maybe aren't as mobile as they need to be. There's a lot of people who were sitting all day, we're sitting in desk chairs, we're not really getting those full degrees of motion at the hip. So we've lost some mobility there. Same thing with the upper back. That thoracic spine is meant to be mobile, but how many of us are a little bit of a slouch posture where we've lost some motion kind of at our upper back, and so we've lost mobility there. But then when we try to golf, we're still trying to make that big rotary movement. So if we've lost rotational motion at the upper back and at the hips, your body's going to compensate somehow to still get the job done. And so it's going to sacrifice motion somewhere else. And a lot of times what happens is that's at the lower back. So the lower back, that lumbar spine, was meant to flex and extend, not really rotate very much, but now we're forcing some extra rotation through the lumbar spine to make up for the fact that we've lost some motion at the hips or at the thoracic spine. Over time, that can cause dysfunction and pain in the lumbar spine as it becomes unstable. And so that's where when we evaluate the golfer, we want to see, do you have the normal patterns of mobility and stability, or have they been broken? And oftentimes that's where we see the problem. So in the example with the lower back, when people come to us for treatment, if they've been dealing with back pain, yes, the back hurts, but really the problem is actually at the hips and the thoracic spine, because until we get the motion back at those segments, the body's still going to compensate and sacrifice motion at the lumbar spine to make up for the fact that we still have the deficits elsewhere. The hips don't necessarily hurt, the thoracic spine doesn't necessarily hurt, the pain's at the lumbar spine, but the lumbar spine is the only thing that's really doing anything, as opposed to the hips and the thoracic spine are really where the dysfunction lies, but they are not necessarily painful. So by evaluating the golfer in kind of full body, we're able to see those patterns of mobility and stability and start to correct not only the pain, but the cause of the pain, so that the person can go back out to golf and not have continued pain or a reoccurrence of pain.